Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are diving into a topic that many of you may be familiar with from personal experience: dementia. However, we want to explore dementia today from a completely new perspective, through the eyes of Bettina Wichers.
Bettina Wichers is a dementia researcher with over 25 years of experience in the field. What makes her unique is that she combines her scientific work with a very personal experience, developing fascinating hypotheses from it.
Exactly. She herself once had an experience that she describes as a dissolution of the self, which led her to see parallels between this state and what happens in dementia. This is particularly interesting for those who care for relatives with dementia, as Bettina's approach could help better understand the behavior of those affected and find new ways of interacting with them.
Let's first introduce Bettina in more detail. She is not only a scientist but has also worked as a teacher and clinical supervisor for people with dementia.
Right, and this combination of theory and practice is incredibly valuable. Bettina does not only have scientific knowledge but also years of hands-on experience. She knows how dementia affects everyday life, both for those suffering from it and for their relatives.
In addition, there is her personal experience, which Bettina herself describes as the dissolution of the self.
She compares it to the Buddhist concept of ayata, a state in which nothing exists.
This moment of absolute nothingness was the trigger for Bettina to explore dementia from a new perspective. She started looking for connections between her experience and the course of dementia.
I am trying to imagine what such a state of absolute nothingness feels like.
It's actually unimaginable for us, as we are constantly surrounded by thoughts and emotions. However, Robert Wolfe, an expert in Advaita and Vedanta, describes ayata as a state beyond existence and non-existence. It is not even nothingness, but rather something that defies all description.
Imagine being in a deep, dreamless sleep. In that state, there is no consciousness, no self, no world.
Aha, that's a good example. In deep sleep, we actually experience the dissolution of consciousness.
Exactly. And this state that Wolfe describes has similarities to what Bettina has observed in people with dementia.
She calls it unconscious emptiness.
And what exactly does she mean by unconscious emptiness?
Bettina believes that dementia is not just a neurological phenomenon, but can also be understood as a gradual or sudden dissolution of the self.
According to Bettina, people with dementia may experience this state of unconscious emptiness, a state where the self, as we know it, no longer exists.
That is a completely different way of looking at dementia than what we usually hear. Instead of focusing on the loss of cognitive abilities, she shifts the focus to the dissolution of the self.
Exactly. And she proposes the thesis that symptoms of dementia, such as disorientation and confusion, can be seen as a consequence of this unconscious emptiness.
Imagine suddenly being in a state of absolute emptiness, without memory, without orientation. That can, of course, be frightening, especially when you don't understand what is happening.
And here, Bettina sees the key to understanding dementia. It is not only about preserving cognitive abilities, but also about accompanying people in this process of self-dissolution and helping them overcome their fear.
That almost sounds as if people with dementia are entering a state that spiritual masters seek to achieve through years of meditation.
So, is dementia perhaps not a disease, but rather a form of spiritual awakening?
That's an interesting question. Of course, dementia is a serious illness with many challenges, both for those affected and their loved ones. But Bettina's approach could help us see dementia differently and find new ways of interacting with those who suffer from it.
In our Western society, we often see the dissolution of the self as something negative, as a disease or weakness. We have no language, no rituals to deal with this experience. This means that people with dementia experience this unconscious emptiness with no preparation, no guidance, no support. Unlike those who embark on a spiritual journey and try to dissolve the ego through meditation or other practices, people with dementia are often overwhelmed by this experience, without knowing what is happening to them.
So, what can we do to better support people with dementia through this process?
At first, Bettina suggests that the dissolution of the self might be a natural developmental task of aging. She compares this process to Rumi's famous quote, "Die before you die."
That almost sounds as if we should let go of our self-identity during life to prepare for death.
In a way, yes. It is about letting go of control over our life, self, and identity, and surrendering to the flow of existence. Bettina has even developed a model that describes different stages of self-awareness in aging.
Yes, I found that particularly fascinating. Could you explain Bettina's model in more detail?
Of course. Bettina distinguishes between 4 different forms of aging: dementia, the aging person, the wise elder, and the transcendent being.
Let's start with the aging person. What characterizes this type?
The aging person tries to hold on to their persona and familiar identity for as long as possible. This often leads to clinging to material things and a gradual withdrawal from active life.
And the wise elder?
The wise elder has already begun to detach from their persona and role and is developing increasing serenity and transcendence. They radiate deep wisdom and inner peace.
And dementia?
Bettina sees dementia as an extreme form of self-dissolution, often accompanied by fear and confusion, because the process occurs unprepared and uncontrollably.
And finally, the transcendent being.
The transcendent being has completely dissolved personal identity and lives in a state of cosmic consciousness. One could say that these individuals have already experienced deep spiritual enlightenment during their lifetime.
So, essentially, they are the superwise.
That's one way to put it. But Bettina also emphasizes that none of these paths are a guarantee for happiness or fulfillment. Every person ages differently, and there is no universal formula. However, Bettina's model shows that, aside from the traditional way of aging, which is often shaped by a fear of decline, there are also alternative possibilities.
Exactly. And perhaps this awareness can help us approach aging with more openness and tranquility.
Bettina also advocates for educating people early about the process of self-dissolution and supporting them through consciousness work.
What exactly does she mean by that?
She refers to methods such as meditation, mindfulness training, and therapeutic guidance, which can help individuals confront the changes of aging and experience self-dissolution with more awareness and less fear.
That sounds like a valuable approach to dealing with aging. But how can we apply these insights to the care of people with dementia?
Bettina advocates for changing our approach to dementia diagnosis. Instead of relying solely on cognitive tests, we should adopt a more comprehensive view of the person. This means we should not only assess cognitive abilities but also try to understand where a person is in their developmental process.
Exactly. She suggests incorporating adult developmental diagnostics alongside standard tests. This would help us determine whether someone is clinging to their persona, showing early signs of wisdom, or perhaps already on the path to transcendence.
This would mean viewing dementia not just as an illness, but as a possible developmental stage of aging.
Right. And this could fundamentally change how we interact with people with dementia.
Instead of pitying them or trying to bring them back to their supposedly lost past, we could learn to accompany them in their present state.
That sounds like a much more respectful and dignified way to interact with people who have dementia. Instead of constantly correcting them or pointing out their deficits, we should try to meet them where they are.
Exactly. And perhaps by doing so, we can also overcome our own fear of aging and death, and approach these natural life processes with more serenity.
Bettina also offers guidance for individuals who are dealing with the topic of aging and self-dissolution.
Yes, on her website and in her lectures, she shares many valuable insights and resources. She helps people consciously shape the aging process and embrace the changes that come with it.
That sounds like a valuable resource for anyone interested in these topics, both for those experiencing aging themselves and for relatives of people with dementia.
Absolutely. And perhaps Bettina's work can inspire us to see dementia and aging differently, not as something threatening, but as a natural development that affects us all.
I think this is a good place to wrap up our deep dive. Today, we have learned a lot about Bettina Wichers and her work, as well as how we can look at dementia from a new perspective.
Yes, and hopefully, we were able to provide some thought-provoking ideas that might help you in interacting with people with dementia. Thank you for listening.
And if you would like to learn more about Bettina Wichers and her work, feel free to visit her website.